Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be diving deep into this idea of emotional intelligence.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it's fascinating.
It's popular too.
It is really
Aren't
popular.
everyone's talking about it.
Yeah, and you've sent us a lot of stuff to look at, academic texts, research articles.
Some popular media mentions as well.
Yeah, so we've got a lot to cover.
We do.
But one thing I've noticed is that even though it seems like everyone's talking about it, the science behind it is still pretty new.
It is, yeah.
So our mission today, I think, is to figure out what it is and what it isn't.
Okay.
Cut through all the hype and then see if it's actually valuable in our lives.
Yeah, find the practical application.
Exactly.
Okay.
So how about we start with a definition?
Sure.
Like, what is emotional intelligence?
Hmm.
Well, the term itself first showed up in psychology journals about 25 years ago.
Oh, wow. So it's not that new.
It's not that new, but it really took off in the last decade.
Yeah, it seems like it.
And a lot of that, I think, is because of Daniel Goleman's book.
Oh, yeah. His book was huge.
Huge.
But it wasn't just like an academic thing. He was arguing that emotional intelligence was actually a better predictor of success than IQ.
Really?
Yeah, and he had all these stories about leaders and entrepreneurs, even artists whose achievements, he said, were because of their emotional skills.
Interesting. So it wasn't just smarts. It was
Something else, something more.
this other kind of intelligence.
Yeah.
So Goleman really brought EI to a much wider audience, I think.
He did.
But the science is more complicated than that.
Right.
There are different perspectives.
Yeah.
So Goleman's model, it's called a mixed model.
Oh, okay.
It includes personality traits and social skills.
Hmm.
And then there are these other researchers, Mayer, Salavi, and Caruso.
Okay.
They wanted a model that was more focused on ability,
So like a pure intelligence.
like an actual intelligence that could be measured.
Interesting.
Yeah, they argued that it should be treated like a distinct kind of intelligence.
Not just personality.
Right, and then it should be measured like we measure cognitive abilities.
That makes sense.
But here's the thing, defining and measuring EI is hard.
Is it?
It's really hard. And I was reading this book, Emotional Intelligence, Science and Myth,
Oh, yeah.
and it talks about this challenge. Unlike with IQ tests where we have all these standard items,
Right.
there's no real blueprint for what an EI item should be.
I see what you mean.
Like, how do you even come up with a question that accurately measures emotional intelligence?
Yeah, it's not like measuring height or weight.
Exactly. It's this intangible thing.
Right.
And then on top of that, there's the problem of self-reporting.
Oh, that's always tricky.
Can we really trust people to accurately assess their own emotional abilities?
That's a good question.
Like, I might think I'm super empathetic,
Right.
but maybe I'm not.
Maybe you just want to be.
Maybe I just want to be right, or maybe I'm not seeing myself clearly.
Yeah, self-perception can be biased.
Totally. So we've got these different models of EI, and we have the challenge of measuring it accurately.
Right.
So let's talk about the tools that researchers are using right now
Okay.
to try to measure this elusive thing called emotional intelligence.
Okay, so what are they using?
There are two main approaches that I've seen.
Right.
The first one is self-report questionnaires,
Oh.
and the second one is performance-based tests.
So like testing the actual skill.
Exactly.
Okay.
One example of a self-report questionnaire is the bar on EQI.
EQI.
Yeah, and the Mayer-Salavi-Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test, or MSCEI, that's an example of a performance-based test.
Okay, so one asks you about yourself.
Yeah.
And the other one makes you do stuff.
Exactly.
Interesting.
But both approaches have limitations.
Oh, I bet.
Like we said, self-report measures can be really biased.
People aren't always honest with themselves.
Not even to themselves.
Well,
And a lot of times they overlap with personality measures.
so are we just measuring personality then?
That's the question. Are we
Right.
just giving old wine new bottles?
It's possible.
Yeah. And then even with the performance-based tests, there are challenges.
Like what?
Well, the scoring can be really complicated,
Oh, I bet.
and it often relies on expert judgment.
So someone has to decide what the right answer is.
Yeah, which introduces subjectivity.
Right, because with emotions, there's not always a clear right or wrong answer.
Exactly. It's all very nuanced.
Yeah.
But even with all these challenges, there are some really cool tests out there.
Oh, tell me about them.
So there's one called the Emotional Accuracy Research Scale,
Okay.
and it focuses on how well people can perceive emotions in others.
How do they do that?
They use things like video clips or audio recordings,
Oh, so it's more dynamic.
much more dynamic than just reading a scenario on paper.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then there's another one called the Levels of Emotional Awareness Scale.
Oh.
It looks at the depth and complexity of a person's emotional vocabulary.
Oh, wow. So, like, how many different emotions they can identify?
Exactly. The idea is that people with higher emotional intelligence can express their feelings in more nuanced ways.
So instead of just saying I'm sad, they might say I'm feeling melancholy.
Right. Or discouraged or dejected.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's a whole spectrum of emotions that we can experience.
And the more words we have for them, the better we can understand them.
Exactly.
I like that.
So we've talked about how to measure emotional intelligence, or at least how people are trying to measure it.
Right.
But why should we even care about this?
Yeah, good question.
What's the big deal?
Why is it important?
Well, one reason to care is that it's connected to our brains.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the research is showing that there are specific neural networks and brain regions involved in processing and regulating emotions.
So there's a biological basis for this.
It seems like there is.
Fascinating.
I know. And, some of the materials you sent mentioned the amygdala and the orbitofrontal cortex.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about those.
So what are those and what do they have to do with emotional intelligence?
Well, the amygdala is like the brain's alarm system.
Okay.
It's responsible for quick emotional reactions like fear.
Like fight or flight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the orbitofrontal cortex is more sophisticated.
So it's like the executive in charge.
Yeah, like the CEO of our emotions.
I like that.
It helps us evaluate emotional information, consider consequences, and regulate our impulses.
So it keeps the amygdala in check.
In a way, yeah. It helps us to pause and think before we act.
Even when we're feeling really strong emotions.
Yeah, it's like the voice of reason.
Interesting.
But even with all this research, the neurological basis of EI is still a mystery.
Yeah, there's so much we don't know.
Right.
One of the articles asked whether emotional intelligence and general intelligence are supported by the same neural networks or if they're distinct.
That's a really good question.
Right, because if they share some of the same neural mechanisms,
Yeah.
then maybe we can target those areas to improve both types of intelligence.
Like through training or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that would be amazing.
But that's a question for future research.
Okay, so we need more research. But let's move on to how emotional intelligence affects our lives.
Yeah, how does it play out in our day-to-day experiences?
Good question.
Well, one area where it seems to matter is in how we handle stress and navigate difficult situations.
Okay, so how does EI affect that?
The materials you send talk about different coping mechanisms.
Right.
Some people are very task-focused.
They just want to solve the problem.
Right, get it done.
Head on.
Yeah, and then other people focus more on managing their emotions first.
So they need to feel okay before they can deal with the problem.
Exactly. And the question is, does having higher EI make you better at coping?
Interesting.
Does it make you more resilient?
Yeah. Are you better able to handle the tough stuff?
That's what researchers are trying to find out.
So what have they found?
There was one study that looked at the daily stress and stress support scale.
Okay.
And they specifically looked at this in performance contexts.
So like at work or school?
Yeah, exactly. And what they found was that people with higher EI tended to experience less stress, and they used more effective coping strategies when they were under pressure.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really valuable.
Especially in high-pressure jobs.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Where stress is just part of the deal.
Exactly, but it's not that simple.
Of course not.
The relationship between EI, personality, and coping is complex.
There are so many factors involved.
Yeah, we can't just say that high EI is a magic bullet.
Right.
It's one piece of the puzzle.
One important piece, though.
Definitely. And speaking of personality,
Yeah.
that's another fascinating area.
What about it?
Well, materials you sent ask this really thought-provoking question.
Okay, what is it?
Can personality traits like extroversion, neuroticism, agreeableness, and conscientiousness,
You know, the big five.
the big five,
Yeah.
can they be seen as aspects of EI?
Oh, wow. So instead of thinking of them as separate things.
Maybe they're all part of this bigger picture of emotional intelligence.
Interesting.
Yeah, like, is someone really emotionally intelligent if they're outgoing and charming, but have no self-control?
Good point.
Right. Or is agreeableness always a good thing?
Or can it be a disadvantage in certain situations?
Exactly. Maybe it depends on the context.
Right, like what works in one situation might not work in another.
Yeah, so maybe we need to think about personality through the lens of emotional competence.
That's a new way of looking at it.
Yeah, instead of just saying someone is extroverted.
We might say they're socially skilled.
Exactly. Or instead of saying someone is neurotic.
We might say they have difficulty regulating their emotions
Right. It's all about how these traits are expressed and managed.
and how they affect our ability to navigate the world.
Yeah.
This is fascinating.
I know, and it brings us to another important area where EI is making a big splash, the workplace.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's talking about emotional intelligence at work.
It's like the new must-have skill.
Right up there with technical skills.
Exactly. But is it all hype, or is there something real there?
Yeah. Is it just a fad or is there substance behind it?
That's what we're going to explore next time.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. You know, as we're exploring this idea of emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
it makes me think about this other concept, social intelligence.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because they seem related, right?
They do seem connected.
Like maybe they overlap?
Yeah, and, social intelligence has been around for a long time.
Oh, yeah, like way before emotional intelligence.
Almost a century.
Wow. And what have they found out about it?
Well, the research has been kind of all over the place.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like early on, they were trying to measure it with tests.
Like what kind of tests?
Well, there was this one called the George Washington Social Intelligence Test.
That's a mouthful.
I know, right? It was back in the 1920s.
Wow. So a long time ago.
And it tried to assess things like judgment in social situations,
Yeah, okay.
memory for names and faces,
Mm.
observation of human behavior.
So like how well you read people.
Exactly. But those early tests had problems.
What kind of problems?
Well, it turned out that they were really just measuring verbal intelligence.
Oh, so not social intelligence at all.
Not really. They were more about general cognitive ability.
So it wasn't a separate thing.
Right. And that raises the same question for EI.
Oh, yeah. Are we just measuring something else?
Exactly. We're just repackaging personality or IQ and calling it emotional intelligence.
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, like are we discovering a new continent or just exploring a peninsula?
I like that analogy.
So we need better tools to map this territory.
Right. We need tests that can clearly differentiate between different types of intelligence.
And there are some promising approaches out there.
Oh, tell me about them.
Okay, so there's this one called the Interpersonal Perception Test, or IPT.
IPT. Okay.
And it uses video clips of real-life social interactions.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just hypothetical scenarios.
No, it's like watching a mini-drama unfold.
And what do they measure?
They measure how accurately people can perceive and understand the emotions in those interactions.
So, like, can you read between the lines?
Exactly. Can you pick up on the subtle cues?
I like that it's more realistic.
Yeah. It's more ecologically valid, as researchers say.
It's closer to real life.
And the research suggests that the IPT is pretty reliable.
That's good.
And it even predicts things like social adjustment and self-reported empathy.
So it's measuring something meaningful.
It seems like it is.
This makes me wonder if we could use virtual reality to measure EI.
Oh, that's a cool idea.
Yeah, like imagine putting someone in a virtual social situation.
And seeing how they respond.
Exactly. That would be so much more immersive than just watching a video.
Yeah, it'd be like a real-life emotional intelligence test.
Right, and you could even create different scenarios to test different skills.
That's a great idea for future research.
Yeah, someone should get on that.
Okay, so another test that I found interesting is the Levels of Emotional Awareness scale.
Oh, yeah, the LEAs.
Yeah, you mentioned this one before.
It focuses on emotional language, right?
Exactly. It's all about how nuanced your vocabulary is when you talk about your feelings.
Okay, remind me how it works.
Well, it's a performance-based test.
So you don't just answer questions about yourself.
Right. They give you different scenarios.
Okay.
And you have to describe your emotional responses in detail.
So like writing a little story?
Kind of. And then trained raters evaluate your responses.
Based on what?
They're looking at the complexity and differentiation of your emotional language.
So if you just say, I'm happy or I'm sad.
That's not very nuanced.
Right, you need to use more specific words.
Like instead of just saying angry, you might say frustrated or irritated or resentful.
Each word has a slightly different meaning.
Yeah. And the idea is that people with higher emotional intelligence can articulate their feelings in more sophisticated ways.
So it's not just about feeling the emotions.
It's also about understanding them.
And being able to communicate them effectively.
Exactly.
This is making me think about whether we can actually improve our emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Can we learn to be more emotionally intelligent?
Or are we stuck with what we're born with?
Nature versus nurture.
The eternal debate.
But if we can train our emotional intelligence,
That would be huge.
it could change everything.
Yeah. Imagine the impact on individuals, relationships, organizations, society as a whole.
It would be a game changer.
And the good news is that the research suggests that EI is malleable.
So we can change it.
It seems like we can.
That's exciting.
It is. And there are all sorts of interventions that people are trying.
Like what?
Well, there are programs for kids and adolescents in schools,
Oh.
and there are training programs for adults in workplaces.
So we can learn this stuff.
It seems like we can.
Cool.
And some programs focus on specific skills, like self-awareness or empathy,
Okay.
and others are more broad. They focus on things like conflict resolution or stress management.
So there's a whole range of options.
Yeah, depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Right? Tailor it to your needs.
Exactly.
Are there any specific programs that have impressed you?
Yeah, there are a couple that stood out to me.
Okay, tell me about them.
So one is called the PAPA-HS program.
PAPHS. What does that stand for?
It stands for Promoting Alternative Thinking Strategies.
Okay, so it's about thinking differently.
Yeah, and it's designed to help kids develop emotional and social competence.
So it's pretty comprehensive.
It is. It teaches them to identify and label their emotions,
Okay.
understand the causes and consequences of feelings,
Hmm.
manage anger and stress effectively.
Those are important skills.
And it also teaches empathy and perspective taking.
Wow. So it's like a whole emotional toolkit.
Exactly. And the research on PAD-HS has been really positive.
So it actually works.
It seems to kids who participate show improvements in emotional awareness,
Okay.
self-control, social skills,
It ain't it.
academic performance.
Oh, wow. So it has ripple effects.
It seems like it does.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And another program that caught my eye is the Resolving Conflict Creatively program, or RCCP.
RCCP. Okay. And what does that one do?
Well, it focuses on teaching kids conflict resolution skills.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And it's been implemented in a lot of schools in New York City and other urban environments.
So in places where conflict is common.
Exactly. And the goal is to foster a culture of cooperation and reduce aggression.
Sounds like a worthy goal.
And the evaluations have shown that it can actually reduce violence and aggressive behavior in schools.
Oh, wow. So it's not just a feel-good program.
No, it's actually making a difference.
That's great.
Yeah, it's about giving kids the tools to handle conflict constructively.
Instead of resorting to violence.
Right. It's about creating a more peaceful learning environment.
I love that.
So we're seeing that these interventions can actually work.
That can make a real difference.
We're moving beyond theory and into practice.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, it shows that we can nurture emotional intelligence, and it can have a positive impact on individuals and communities.
It's not just some abstract idea.
And speaking of real-world applications,
Yeah.
let's talk about the workplace.
Okay. Everyone wants to know about EI at work.
It's the hot topic, right?
Yeah. Everyone's saying that soft skills are essential now.
And emotional intelligence is at the top of the list.
But what does the research actually say?
Yeah, what specific emotional competencies matter for success in different jobs?
Good question.
Well, it's becoming clear that emotional and social skills are not just nice to have anymore.
They're essential.
They're essential for success in many professions.
I believe it.
Like take emotional awareness, for example.
Okay.
People who are aware of their own emotions
Yeah.
and how those emotions affect their behavior,
Right.
they tend to be better communicators.
Yeah.
They're better at handling stress, and they're more likely to make good decisions under pressure.
So they have an advantage.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
they have this internal compass that helps them navigate the ups and downs of work life.
They can stay on course even when things get rough.
Exactly. And they're also better at understanding the emotions of their colleagues.
Oh, that's important too.
Yeah, it's crucial for building relationships,
Yeah.
fostering collaboration,
Right.
creating a positive work environment.
So emotional awareness is foundational.
It seems like it is.
It's the basis for everything else.
And then there's self-regulation.
Oh, yeah, it's a big one.
How do we manage our emotions so they don't derail us?
It's especially at work.
Right, we can't just let our emotions run wild.
No, we need to be professional.
Yeah, self-regulation is about controlling our impulses,
Okay.
staying calm under pressure,
Right.
adapting to change.
Without losing it.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like having a mental dimmer switch for our emotions
I love that analogy.
so we can turn them up or down as needed.
Right, because sometimes we need to feel our emotions fully,
Yeah,
but other times we need to dial them back.
exactly. And self-regulation is important in every job.
But some jobs require it even more?
Oh, yeah, like high-stress roles.
Right, where the stakes are high?
Think about first responders,
Okay.
surgeons, air traffic controllers.
Yeah. Their ability to regulate their emotions could be life or death.
Literally.
Mhm.
And self-regulation helps them avoid burnout, too.
Oh, that's important.
Yeah, it's a protective factor against chronic stress.
So emotional intelligence can actually make us healthier.
It seems like it can.
That's good to know.
And then, of course, there's empathy.
Oh, yeah, everyone's talking about empathy these days.
It's the new superpower.
Right. Everyone wants to be more empathetic.
But what does it actually mean to be empathetic?
Well, it's about understanding and sharing the feelings of others, even if you haven't been in their shoes.
Right. It's about seeing things from their perspective.
Yeah, and being sensitive to their needs.
And responding in a way that builds trust.
So it's not just about feeling sorry for someone.
No, it's about connecting with them on a human level.
And empathy is especially important in jobs that involve a lot of interaction with people.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like salespeople,
Teachers,
therapists,
customer service reps.
all those people-facing roles.
Exactly. They need empathy to build rapport,
Yeah.
establish trust,
Right.
create positive interactions,
It's about going beyond the transaction.
and making a real connection.
Human to human.
Exactly. And then we have social skills.
Oh, yeah, that's a broad category.
It covers a lot of ground.
So what does it include?
Well, it's about interacting effectively with others, communicating clearly, building consensus, resolving conflicts constructively,
Yeah.
inspiring and motivating teams.
So it's like a toolbox for social interactions.
I like that analogy.
You've got all these different tools.
And you need to know which one to use in each situation.
Right. The right tool for the job.
Exactly. And just like any tool, social skills need to be practiced.
Use it or lose it.
Yeah, the more we use them, the better we get at them.
So get out there and socialize.
Exactly.
Put yourself out there.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Everyone does.
Yeah, it's all part of the learning process.
Okay, so we've talked about emotional awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and social skills.
Yeah, those are some of the key competencies of EI.
And they all matter in the workplace.
But there's one more thing I want to touch on.
What's that?
Occupational stress.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
It's a huge problem these days.
Everyone's stressed out.
And it's costing companies a fortune.
In lost productivity,
Absenteeism,
health problems.
turnover.
It's a mess.
And it seems like the workplace is getting more stressful all the time.
Yeah, with all the uncertainty.
The long hours.
The technology.
It's a lot to handle.
And the research shows that people with higher EI are more resilient to stress.
They can cope better.
They don't freak out as easily.
They can manage their emotions.
They can stay calm.
And they can find solutions.
Instead of just dwelling on the problems.
So they're better equipped to handle the pressure?
Yeah, they can roll with the punches.
Exactly. And this resilience is becoming increasingly important in today's work world.
It's a survival skill.
Yeah, you got to be able to adapt and bounce back.
Or you'll get crushed.
So what can organizations do to create a more supportive work environment?
Well, they need to create a culture of well-being.
What does that mean?
It means that employees feel supported,
Okay.
valued, empowered.
So it's not just about getting the job done.
It's about creating a positive experience for employees.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that people have emotions.
And those emotions matter.
Exactly. And leaders need to model emotional intelligence.
Walk the talk.
Right. And they need to promote open communication.
So people can talk about their feelings.
And they need to create structures that support employee well-being.
Like what kind of structures?
Things like flexible work arrangements,
right.
employee assistance programs,
Right.
opportunities for professional development.
Yeah, investing in their people.
Exactly. It's about creating a win-win situation.
Where both the organization and the employees benefit.
But there's a flip side to all of this.
Oh, what's that?
What are the potential downsides of having high EI?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, because we've been talking about all the positives.
Right. It seems like EI is this amazing thing.
But could there be a dark side?
That's what we're going to explore next.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've spent the last two parts really digging into this idea of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, all the different aspects of it.
We've talked about how hard it is to define it,
And measure.
how it might work in our brains.
The neuroscience of it.
Yeah, and even some of the potential downsides.
The dark side of EI.
But now it's time to bring it all together.
Yeah. What does it all mean?
What are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Right. How can we use this information?
Exactly. So let's say someone is listening to this and thinking, okay, this is all very interesting.
But what can I actually do with it?
What would you tell them?
I would say the most important thing to remember is that emotional intelligence is not something you're born with.
It's not like a fixed trait,
It's a set of skills.
like a muscle you can build.
Yeah, exactly. You
Right.
can develop it over time.
So don't get discouraged if you don't feel very emotionally intelligent right now.
It's a journey.
It's a process.
And you can start wherever you are.
So where do we begin?
Well, the foundation of EI is self-awareness.
Okay, so what does that mean?
It means paying attention to your emotions.
Like noticing how you feel,
Yeah. Being aware of your internal state.
not just letting your emotions control you.
Right. Becoming the observer.
So how do we do that?
Well, one simple practice is to do a daily emotional check-in.
Okay, what's that?
Just take a few minutes each day
Okay.
and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now?
Just notice it.
Yeah, and where do I feel it in my body?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, our emotions often manifest physically.
Like a tightness in your chest?
Yeah, or a knot in your stomach.
Butterflies.
And then ask yourself what might be triggering this feeling.
So you start to see the patterns.
Exactly. You become more aware of your emotional triggers.
And once we're more self-aware.
Then we can start to regulate our emotions.
So we're not just reacting all the time.
Right. We can choose how we respond.
Which is a superpower.
It gives you so much more control.
And how do we learn to do that?
Well, there are lots of techniques.
Like?
Deep breathing.
Okay.
Mindfulness meditation. Cognitive behavioral therapy.
So there's a whole range of options.
Yeah, you can find what works for you.
And it's about making it a habit.
Yeah, like brushing your teeth.
Emotional hygiene.
I love that.
Okay, so what about empathy?
Empathy, the heart of connection.
How do we become more empathetic?
Well, it's about stepping outside of yourself.
Seeing the world through someone else's eyes?
Exactly, and recognizing that everyone is going through something.
We all have our own struggle.
And our own joys.
Yeah, it's about remembering our shared humanity.
So how do we practice empathy?
We'll start by paying attention to the people around you. Notice their body language, their tone of voice,
Right.
their facial expressions.
The subtle cues.
Yeah. And ask yourself, what might this person be feeling?
What's going on in their world?
Don't judge.
Just be curious.
And try to understand.
And the more you do that,
The more natural empathy will become.
it's like a muscle you can strengthen.
And finally, let's talk about social skills.
Oh yeah, those are important too.
They're essential for navigating our social world,
Especially in the digital age.
where we're losing the art of face-to-face interaction.
So how do we improve our social skills?
Well, the key is practice.
Just like anything else.
Get out there and talk to people.
Yeah, join a club.
Volunteer.
Go to events.
Put yourself in social situations.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
It's all part of the process.
And remember to have fun.
Yeah, social interaction should be enjoyable.
Not a chore.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the what, the why, and the how of emotional intelligence.
From the science to the practice.
And we've seen that it's a valuable skill set
That can make a real difference in our lives.
in our relationships
At work.
and in our communities.
So let's keep learning.
Keep practicing.
And keep exploring the power of emotional intelligence.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.